we talked about specifically scenarios 1 and 4 being really idealistic and like optimistic or like overly optimistic, like especially in terms of like global healing and like the states like coming together and like also like different nations coming together, because like I personally don't think that that's realistic expectation of the country, especially with Donald Trump as the president. Like I just don't see. I mean, even I think it was Frank or Catherine who might have brought up the fact that like countries kind of responded to the virus as it came to their own country, like not really turning to other nations. So like having that whole like global healing like idea, like I don't think that that was realistic, or like we kind of didn't agree that we thought that that was realistic. And then we talked a lot about Donald Trump, like how like he doesn't really understand his impact as the president, because like what he says people take very seriously, especially in terms of like that Lysol comment. And like I think effective leadership is something that's like more important when we think about the lasting effects of like the world and like a global pandemic, is like we should be focusing on how like even different state leaders might not be doing what's best for their own like their own city or their own state, and the president's not doing what's best for the country. I think that's most of what we talked about.
Interesting. Any thoughts from others? Alex?
I was just talking about what my group talked about, if that's, oh yeah, so our group talked about more of what is it when people say economic impact. So people throw around a lot about, reopening up the economy and there's economic impacts by the virus. But what does that mean? And how can, with the information that we know now, can we balance that out? So there's that antibody test in New York, which essentially means that you had the antibodies, you had the virus, whether you be asymptomatic or you just don't have any symptoms at all. And it was 21% of the people they tested had current antibodies, which means that a large population of New York City, even with extreme social distancing, got the virus. And the other thing that it tells us is that with the new kind of subset of people, that the death rate is equal to the common cold. And just like the common cold, or cold, the flu. And just like the flu, many of the people who get sick and die from the coronavirus and the flu are people who have pre-existing conditions. So with this in mind, how can we start to reopen up the economy in a way that's cognizant that we have to protect these people who have pre-existing conditions, but also understand that with the economy being shut down, tens of millions of people are unemployed. The health impacts of these people who are unemployed don't have any money, so they can't get treatments for themselves. The depression that's going on, people staying inside for 6 weeks, the increase of suicides because people are staying inside for all weeks, the fact that we have interest rates at 0 and that we're just printing more money, which causes terrible economic impacts that we can't predict in the future. So how do we balance this all out while keeping people safe, but also not destroying our nation's economy and our future?
Can I just ask a quick question?
Yeah.
It's not just people who have pre-existing conditions who are dying, though. There are people who are dying that don't have pre-existing conditions, and that it's not always the same. And I think that's one reason why it's such a problem with opening the economy back up. Is that an accurate statement?
Oh, yeah, sorry. I guess I was a little too broad. 90%, almost around 90% of people who die have pre-existing conditions. So sure, there is the 10% of people, and that's horrible. And obviously any death, whether it be person from pre-existing condition, healthy young person, a death is a death, and that's obviously natural, and we don't want to diminish that. And I guess in point, you are correct. But we, as we have the ability, we're kind of lucky, we live in New York City and whatnot. That's kind of the center point of the thing. But a lot of these people depend on their jobs, and we can't do virtually. Right? They can't do civic forums virtually. Their jobs have to be there and present. And it's impossible. It's really hard for us to understand, as most of us, and I don't want to speak for everyone. I know a lot of people have families that might look at their hands. But if you can't be there, you can't get money. You're really screwed. And a lot of these people live paycheck to paycheck, and us as an economy, we can't just be printing money. And us opening up the economy is vastly important, right? We're going to destroy our economy. A lot of us are not going to be able to get jobs because of it in 5-10 years because we lost all this money in these like month and a half periods. And reopening of the economy is something that we have to be careful about, but something we need to do. People need to get back to work. And if we don't do that, then the economic impacts might start to outweigh the impacts of coronavirus at some point. And when do we, and it isn't like all or nothing. It isn't like you open up the economy or you don't, and people die. You want people to die, you don't. But we have to do some version of opening up the economy while also being cognizant that we need to protect the people who are most vulnerable, which is on large people with pre-existing conditions.
Well, at this point, I feel like reopening the economy is a death sentence for some people. Like sending them back to their jobs, there's truly the potential that they will die. Like, yes, obviously, a lot of people who have died had pre-existing conditions. We need to clarify that having a pre-existing condition doesn't mean a person was going to die in the first place. They died because of the virus. I think that's something we don't really think about. Like, it's easy to dismiss it because they had a pre-existing condition. But for some people, a pre-existing condition is something like asthma. You don't die from asthma on a day-to-day basis. But in terms of reopening the economy, yes, there are people who are out of work and who are suffering, but to send them back to work is risking their life. Even going to the grocery store at this point for some is risking their life. It does not make sense to send people back to work if they have the potential to get seriously sick or die, because death is, the worst thing that can happen to a person. So we need to continue to support families through whether it's another stimulus package or whether it's private-public partnerships to provide some sort of economic relief to families. We just need to band together as a community to come up with economically stimulating solutions to support low-income families who don't have the opportunity to get their annual household income. So for example, people are furloughed, they should still receive their paychecks. That's on big business, that's on the corporations, because like, for example, with Disney, they furloughed their workers, they're not being paid, and then the head of the company is going to end up making, I think, something like $128 million this year. Really? Do you need $128 million when half your workers are furloughed? Or can you take a pay cut to give them all a small check to help like relieve the pain they're going to feel? There are more solutions that we have to like removing this pressure that people are going to feel that is not reopening the economy, because at that point that is still so dangerous that it could kill people.
Well, I mean, if our number one, way of looking at this is people could die, then why do we have cars? Or why do we have basically anything that could possibly lead to deaths? We can't just say, well, there's a possibility that people, and obviously, once again, it's not, I don't know why this is a people go back to work and people die, and I don't know why they make it so extreme, right? People have to get back to work in some capacity.
It's
right?
a pandemic. It is
Cars
aren't a pandemic.
Can you please stop interrupting me? So what I was trying to say is, right, we can do this in a sensible manner, but at some point, we lose the capacity to help people, right? It isn't like there's like a big vault of money somewhere we can just hand out. The way the federal government is helping people is by printing money, by lowering interest rates. And at some point, we can't print more money. A lot, and the other second part of your argument about the businesses, we can get into conversation about businesses, big businesses, but a lot of the businesses that are furloughing people aren't just big multi-billion-dollar corporations. A lot of them are small businesses or boutiques that can't sustain, they're going to go bankrupt. And if we allow the people if we force companies of any size, big companies, small companies, particularly talk about small to medium-sized companies, if we force them to pay paychecks, they're going to go bankrupt, and all those people are going to be unemployed. And the entire point of furloughing people is you conserve liquidity being cash, you conserve cash, so you're taking all the losses so that while these people in the short term are in bad situations, they don't all get fired and they don't lose their jobs. The company doesn't go under, so that after this pandemic's over, or at least when we start slowly reopen up the economy, they have a job waiting for them. And that is what's most important, because we can't have a country where 50 million people are unemployed because we gave them cash in the short term, but then companies went under.
I also think, like, if you think about, especially in New York City, a lot of the people who are low-income families and who we are trying to say that we should be trying to send back to work, in a lot of those communities are the ones where those pre-existing conditions exist even the most. So even if we're like I don't think it's safe to have like those people going to work and then coming back to their communities, where like a lot of low income communities have high asthma rates, high like there's so many things that are happening in those communities that I don't think like is that it like sending people back to work would be a productive fix to it. I don't know. I think like when we think about that way, we're kind of acting as if those two things are mutually exclusive, like low income family and then pre-existing condition. But I think the thing is the biggest problem is that is mutually inclusive. Like that's very mutually inclusive. Like the people who are struggling are also the people who need healthcare help.
I
And
really
I
agree
think
with
that
that.
the comparison to cars, that like cars and planes kill more people than like the flu and the virus, is like, it's such a weird comparison because cars and travel are essential to the way we function when we're not living in a global pandemic. Like that's very different from like not like from dying from a disease and dying from like an accident of like an accident that happened like from an instance with like a vehicle like that. I just don't think that those are like really comparable. And also the comparison to the flu, it's like the flu was this dangerous when there wasn't a vaccine. That's the reason there was like that's why it was the influenza pandemic. Like this is like comparing it to the flu in terms of like as a disease, like sure they may be similar and the flu may have cause more deaths per year, but like this was mirroring, I mean, not completely because this was like 100 years ago, but this mirrors the reaction that happened during the flu pandemic, because it's a dangerous disease because it's like we don't know how it reacts in the body, we don't know what can happen long term because it's only been like 6.5 weeks. And like just comparing it to the flu is also something that like I just can't really like, I can't fathom why people do that, because one of the reasons it's dangerous is because it's such a new disease and there isn't a vaccine for it. And like when people compare it to the flu, they're forgetting that like part of the reason that people die from the flu is because of like access to vaccines and like what Makita said about like the intersectionality of like being low income, being like working an essential job. And like also like I don't think anybody's mentioned race. Like 70% of the deaths from coronavirus nationally are people of color. And a large part of that is because they're the community most affected by pre-existing conditions like higher rates of asthma and heart health problems. And they're also lower income, so access to like adequate care or like even being able to work a job where you can work from home and not be in contact with other people is like significantly less for communities of color. And I don't think that's something that we've talked about yet today, which I just thought was a
Also,
highlight.
cars aren't contagious. I think that's an important thing. When somebody gets into a car, they're voluntarily understanding that there's a risk of their transportation. When somebody goes outside and doesn't follow the rules, doesn't wear a mask and gets closer than 6 feet, the person who they're affecting is not consenting to getting the virus. When you enter a car, you consent to those risks. When you're just walking outside to get groceries, you don't consent to getting the virus. And I think Juliana made a really great point about race, because I think that it has become so ingrained in American society for us to be built off of the backs of people of color, to have a society that is based on the oppression of people of color. It is so sad to think about the fact that even something as like out of our control as a virus affects people of color more than white people is so depressing. But it makes sense in America that that would happen because our country is so divided in terms of providing less opportunity to people of color. Like even in New York, more MTA buses that are older than 12 years old that don't have the proper environmental regulations are located in communities predominantly populated by people of color, which leads to higher rates of asthma, which leads to like worse, medical conditions. And then there's less access to doctors in those areas. There's less access to medical care. So those issues just get worse and worse. And then you add something like a pandemic, it just obviously is going to affect those people so much more. So to compare it to something like a car just doesn't make sense, because when you get in a car, you consent to getting hurt. When you're a person of color, you're not consenting to getting hurt. When you're living in a society where you just want to go buy groceries, you're not consenting to getting hurt. So I think we really need to choose our words carefully when we're talking about something as serious as a virus, instead of making like these little metaphors, because I think that's a little counterproductive, to be honest.
So I guess I see that generally people didn't like the metaphor comparing to cars. I was more talking about the fact that whatever, we'll just forget about that metaphor. But I think we're kind of nitpicking my words rather than thinking about the broad topic in general. And Juliana, I don't want to nitpick your words either, but just you said the word essential, right? That cars are essential travel. And I really want to like take that. Is that are jobs not essential? And is a productive economy not essential? Not just for white people. I don't want to make this about race. I want to make this as all Americans. So if that's okay with the group, I'm going to do that.
It's about race.
It's like you can't not to
That's the
interrupt.
issue. That the issue is
Can I
about
please
all
finish
Americans.
one sentence? I was very kind and did not interrupt you. I at least like to possibly not get interrupted myself. So what I'm trying to say is that obviously there's race aspects to this. Are African Americans and Latinos and people of color being more predominantly affected by this? Yes, 100%. I'm not disagreeing with that. I don't think anyone's disagreeing with that. If you guys watch the president's briefings, he's not disagreeing with that. No one's disagreeing that this is disproportionately hurting people of color. But really, it's hurting everyone too. And if we only look at a pandemic obviously, we need to help people who are different races. We got to make sure that everyone is helpful. That's the thing. We need to help everyone. Can't just if you think about this too narrow-mindedly, which is about race, we fail the country. Is it important to keep race in mind? Yes, it is very, very important. What I'm trying to say was more, since you brought up race, people who are of color disproportionately work with jobs that they can't do virtually. So we talk about opening the economy, helping those people out. We can't endlessly help those people out. We can't just endlessly be printing money. I'm seeing this more from a practical standpoint. The best way to help out people of color, and since this is obviously a running theme, is that we need to open up the economy in a safe way that doesn't, do the virus. But I'll talk about the flu pandemic. I was talking about the flu in terms of 21% of New Yorkers by this test had the coronavirus. So when you do the number of people who had the flu, the number of people who died from the flu is very comparable to the number of people who had coronavirus, people who died from coronavirus. And just like the flu vaccine is not always useful because it changes just like the coronavirus. That's how the way I was comparing it. I was not comparing it to the 1918 Spanish flu. Now, back to the economic standpoint, I'm trying to create solutions. We as a nation cannot be not working for as long as we've been not working now. Double that by double, we're going to destroy our economy, which affects everyone. People of color, white people, women, men, doesn't matter. It affects everyone equally, right? We can't be endlessly printing money. We cannot be endlessly sending out stimulus checks because eventually we run out of money to give away. So if there's a way we can calmly and level-headedly open up some parts of the economy without causing more cases to happen, that should be good. But we, especially as people like you guys who seem to be very mindful about people of color in their communities, we have to be cognizant that we can't just keep the economy shut down forever, as that, as you guys said, disproportionately affects people of color.
Can I ask you a
I
question?
think that
Yes, of course.
Oh, sorry, not to interrupt.
Oh, please, I was done. Thank you.
I see what you're saying in the sense that like people need money, right? It's a thing. It's a capitalist country we live in. If you want to survive, you need money. Point blank. Period. That's not something I'm gonna disagree with you about because you're right. But I feel like when we look at the people who need money, when we look at the people who are living check to check, when we look at the people who are risking their lives every single day to go out of their house, to be susceptible to the virus, to get said checks, I feel like those are the people of color. And so when we're saying that like it's affecting, the coronavirus affects everyone and this economy drop is affecting everyone. Yes, it is. Every single person is affected in some way or another. But I feel like when we look at it specifically, it's disproportionately affecting people of color. And I think there needs to be another conversation about race, kind of like what Juliana was saying, especially because it hadn't been brought up until she said something. And then in addition to that, I just feel like like I don't know, it just doesn't sit right with me that like not even like specifically to you, because this is a common mindset, Alex. I think it's just in the sense that like, oh, we need to go back outside, we need to start working, we need to start doing this. And like, yes, I completely agree, like people's lives are at stake because they're not going to work, and like if there was no virus and everyone went back to work right now, like I think it would do wonders for like people who are struggling at the moment. But oh, sorry, I don't know if you heard my dog, but I'm sorry if you did.
Your dog has something
But
to
like, yeah, he wanted to climb in. He does that a lot. But I think that like this is something very serious, especially because like at some time in like the 21st century, we have no idea. Like we have no idea how it works. We just know that it can affect anybody and everybody. So when I feel like when you take that and then factored into the fact that I don't know, I don't want to like lie, but majority of the people who are going out and risking their lives every single day are people of color, I feel like we can't just say we need to open up the doors and let everybody go back outside, and like we need to fix our economy, because like I feel like our economy needs fixing in many more ways than one, but that might just be a personal opinion. But I feel like to say that like it's more okay, maybe you didn't say it's more important, but it is equally as important to kind of open up the economy and like create resources for people to make money like outside, rather than like looking into the military budget that's particularly high in numbers, and maybe putting that into education, or putting that into the people who don't have to like food and a constant check, or maybe looking into any other budget. Like I don't remember who said, but like if that one Disney CEO like took 10 seconds out of his or her day to like be a little bit more selfless and give to the people below them, I feel like if we kind of kept this energy and kind of held our government to that same standard, rather than holding the people who have no say and kind of are forced to go outside and be outside and do these everyday things, I feel like that can make much more of an impact than just kind of the economy.
I don't want to hog the microphone. I know we have to go to our
Alex, yeah, I do think that we need to wind down this section. This is a really rich conversation. This is a really hard conversation to have. These issues are very personal to us. Many of us have had family members who have been afflicted. Some of us have lost people for it. It's a hard thing to talk about, and I really want to thank you all for being able to listen and share your views. There aren't easy answers. I think that this conversation illustrates that. But if everyone is comfortable, are we okay to sort of table this for now to move into our civic action groups? Is there anyone who feels like there's something that you're burning to say that you haven't had opportunity to say before we do so?
I'm not like burning to say this. I just wanted to mention, like, I think this is not only something that Alex mentioned. I think this is a problem in terms of like a lot of the discussion about coronavirus, especially like what I'm seeing on the news, doesn't really discuss the racial aspect. And I 100% agree that like the response to the virus needs to be something that can effectively help all Americans, and like it should be something that's collective and about everybody. But we can't only say that we need this response to be effective and applicable for all Americans if like we neglect the conversation of how all Americans aren't on the same playing field. Like having a response for every single American isn't going to look the same, because especially like for communities of color, or like particularly Black people, because like they're one of the most affected groups by this disease. And like having a response that also I don't know, that's just something I wanted to mention, that like when we talk about this pandemic, we need to make sure that when we say that we need to help all Americans, we need to acknowledge that in helping all Americans, different groups of Americans are going to need different supports and different, like they're going to need to be different policies for different affected groups of people, and those different affected groups of people happen to be majority minority communities. That's all I just
can I really quickly piggyback off of that, just like super quick comment. I think I don't know if I don't want to bring up another metaphor, but like I think the coronavirus kind of acts like a mirror almost, like it's like America as a nation, and we're sort of being able to see like the how like different parts of America have been disproportionately affected by this virus. And I think that while it's important, like you're saying, to certainly have like a direct response to you know, African American communities, communities of color, I think it's also important to like think ahead, slightly ahead of this virus as well. And I think your name is Asher. So yeah, Asher, I think was talking a lot about like, you know, the underlying issues that are already in these communities, what some of the reasons why, you know, they have pre-existing health conditions and why they are mainly essential workers. And we kind of also need to look ahead and think about mending these issues in our society, which have become just, they're just unable to ignore now because of the virus. So in a way, I think, you know, that can also be a conversation that, you know, can be thought of when we also talk about the economy reopening, because these communities need to be repaired in order for, you know, at the end of the day, a more flourishing America and a more prosperous America as we try to rebuild our economic growth. So I think that's also a really important part of the conversation that involves a little bit more like forward thinking, since we don't have as much control, especially over like the medical part and the vaccine and everything like that.
Just last thing,
add to that
I'll
really
make it do. Oh,
Sorry.
just last thing, really, really short. My opinion, it affects people of in the lower classes as well, of all races. And I don't want to start rehashing an argument. It's also very important that it obviously disproportionately affects people of color. But I feel as if, and this also happens a lot of our national conversation, that we forget a lot of people in Appalachia, a lot of these poor people, and that when we talk about helping people, we have to ensure we help. We also help people of people of color, of course, that we just don't gloss over it as a just purely race issue, and a lot of it's also just an economic issue and a class issue. And
Could I add something really quick? Oh, sorry.
Yes, please.
Oh, sorry. But I also think that we need to acknowledge that for any community, things aren't just going to magically get better if we reopen the economy. Like, there's still a virus that's going to spread and continue to spread. And the more we try to bring people back to work, it's just going to be more waves of the virus. Like, it's not going to go away unless we deal with it now.
I will say one last quick point. So sorry. I completely, I hear what everyone's saying. And I think that, while I don't agree with everything, Alex, that you're saying, I do see some validity in your point in terms of looking towards the future, because I don't think, when we're talking about people of color being disproportionately affected, that's kind of happening right now in the status quo. And the reason for that is because, like, obviously, like access to healthcare, but also in terms of like this idea that people are already being disproportionately affected. And on top of that, the stimulus bills and all the like bills that Congress is passing are just not affecting people who live on a day-to-day paycheck in terms of what they can do. Like, there's people who are in quarantine, obviously, that are still earning money and are still, you know, doing fine. Whereas there's, you know, a lot of small businesses like in Chinatown and other places in New York City that are being drastically affected. And I think there is some merit to looking towards the future in terms of what we can do with our economy and how we can help those people. Because right now, I think we're glossing over the issue a bit in terms of saying, oh, because we're social distancing and staying inside, like everything is fine now, when really there are people who are being negatively impacted by that. I don't think that's something to ignore. There definitely is actions in our economy that I feel like we should be thinking about and planning for in the future, because I do agree that in the long term, we can't continue like on this path, despite like, even if the virus continues for years and years to come, like we can't just keep, I do agree with that we can't just keep, you know, throwing money at the issue. There needs to be some sort of, reworking in terms of what we do with our economy and do in terms of, you know, sending people to work in some capacity. And I don't think that he's saying that we should just all at once come out of our homes and start interacting with each other. But that's definitely something we need to think about.
Thank you so much, Sarah, for wrapping that up with respect and wisdom. I wish we had many hours more to talk about this, but do want to make sure that you have time. So we're going to be going into our civic action groups. as you reconnect, you may want to take a few minutes, bio break, pick up some food, do what you need to do. The work ahead of us over the next 90 minutes are to revisit and refine your work on your project, and then to prep to present. So I think it's 3 weeks from today. You will be presenting to civic movers and shakers. We want to take full advantage of that exposure and really enable you to show yourselves and the work that you've done. So I put the link to the agenda in the chat box. Your group facilitators will share that as well. We're going to push this back a little bit, but an hour from now at 1:30, you're going to do mock presentations and feedback to 2 other groups. You obviously will not be fully ready, and that's okay, but we want to do a simulation so that you can really get feedback before we have prime time performances in 3 weeks. Any questions before we go into our small groups? Okay, I'm going to open up the groups. Kate, are you in immigration?
Yes, I'm in immigration.
Great.
Thank you.
You should have gotten your invitation.